It begins quietly, not with triumph, but with space. A stillness where there used to be a storm. The people who once triggered you no longer hold the same power. The ache that used to echo in your chest now feels like a memory. This is not because life has suddenly become gentle, but because you have. Carl Jung believed that the shadow, the hidden, repressed parts of the psyche, doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It grows stronger, louder, until it speaks through projection, addiction, anxiety, or rage. But when you begin the long work of integration, something sacred happens. You stop being at war with yourself. You start recognizing your anger, envy, and fear not as enemies, but as exiled messengers. And little by little, your shadow stops running the show, not because it's been defeated, but because it's been heard. This video is for those standing at that threshold. You may not even realize it yet, but something within you has shifted. You are no longer being driven by what you used to suppress. These are the signs your shadow no longer controls you, and your soul is finally beginning to lead. Carl Jung taught that the shadow contains everything we reject about ourselves: our shame, our rage, our jealousy, even our brilliance. It's the part of the psyche we exile in order to be accepted. But the paradox is this: the more we push it away, the more power it gains. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What controls you isn't always obvious. It often hides in your reactions, your patterns, your projections onto others. When you are unaware of your shadow, you live from defense. You overcompensate, you judge others for what you secretly fear in yourself. You chase people or roles that validate a false self. But the path of individuation, Jung's term for the journey towards psychological wholeness, is about turning toward the shadow with courage and compassion. Integration doesn't mean erasing the shadow, it means holding it, listening to it, allowing it to be part of your story, not the author of it. When you begin doing this, subtle but profound changes unfold. Your peace becomes less performative. Your emotions gain nuance. Your relationships deepen. And most importantly, your choices no longer stem from fear, but from alignment. What follows are 4 signs that this inner alchemy has already begun, and that your shadow, once a silent puppeteer, has become an honored part of your inner council. Sign number 1, you no longer demonize the parts of you that once shamed you. There was a time when the things you hid, your anger, your jealousy, your sadness, felt like stains on your soul. You apologized for your depth. You filtered your feelings, distorting yourself to fit a mold that never quite held your shape. You wore masks so convincingly you began to forget they were masks. But something shifted. One day, your rage didn't frighten you. Your grief didn't repulse you. Your envy became a clue, not a curse. You realized these emotions weren't proof that you were bad. They were proof that you were human. Jung taught us that the shadow doesn't vanish when we push it away. It waits in the wings, silent but powerful, until we turn to face it. And when we do, it offers us something far more transformative than guilt or shame. It offers us insight. Now, when old patterns arise, you don't spiral into shame. You pause, you breathe, you listen, you ask, "What are you trying to tell me?" This is not indulgence, nor is it denial. It's emotional maturity. It's learning to mother your own shadow, not to judge it. The parts of you that once screamed for attention now speak calmly because they know they'll be heard. You've learned that your anger is not a sign of weakness, but of passion. Your sadness, not a sign of defeat, but of depth. Your jealousy, not a curse, but a mirror reflecting something you've long denied in yourself. The tension still exists, the urges still arise, but they no longer erupt without warning. They communicate, like a quiet invitation to explore the complexity of your being. When you stop making enemies out of your emotions, your shadow stops ruling from the darkness. It becomes a teacher, a guide, a necessary part of your journey toward wholeness. And in this, you become whole too. Not by erasing the parts you once rejected, but by accepting them with compassion. When you hold space for all of you, the shadow loses its power to control. You are no longer at war with yourself. Instead, you begin to walk toward peace, integration, and self-understanding. Sign number 2. You recognize projection and call it back with grace. We project what we refuse to claim. The friend you think is too much, perhaps she mirrors your own disowned boldness. The partner you label emotionally unavailable, maybe he reflects the part of you that withholds love. Jung wrote that projection is one of the most insidious ways the shadow controls us. When we blame the outside world for what lives within, we abandon our inner authority. But now, you've begun to see the pattern. You catch yourself mid-thought and ask, is this truly about them or me? You no longer rush to defend your ego. You stay curious, gentle, honest. You begin to own your reactions. You take back what you once cast out. This doesn't mean you excuse bad behavior. It means you stop outsourcing your healing. You stop needing others to change in order to feel at peace. And this is radical sovereignty. Shadow tension still arises, but now you see it as a mirror, not a monster. You stop pointing fingers and start tracing the reflection. You recognize that when you criticize others, it's often because you've rejected something within yourself. The anger you feel towards someone's selfishness is a reflection of the selfishness you haven't allowed yourself to express. The judgment you have towards someone's vulnerability is often the vulnerability you hide. When you begin to recognize projection, you no longer need to expel the shadow onto others. You bring it back. You make space for what you've cast away. And with this reclaiming comes freedom. Freedom from the need to blame. Freedom from the chains of unconscious patterns. The shadow still speaks, but now it speaks through your awareness, not your reaction. You've become the witness. When you recognize projection in real time and retrieve your power without shame, the shadow no longer controls you. You've become its witness, not its puppet. You stop reacting with fear or blame, and instead you act with understanding. You've called your power back from the places you used to project it, and in doing so, you've regained your sovereignty. The more you recognize projection and pull it back into yourself, the more you own your inner world and cease to be controlled by unconscious forces. You are no longer subject to the projections of the world. You are becoming your own authority. Sign number 3, you choose response over reaction, even when triggered. Triggers used to hijack your nervous system. One wrong word, one look, and you'd spiral into silence, into rage, into withdrawal. But now, something is different. You still feel the sting, but there's a pause, a sacred breath before the storm. Jung said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. But when we learn to pause, to feel without collapsing, to observe without judging, we reclaim the steering wheel. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is somatic literacy. You feel your feet. You find your center. You choose how to respond instead of letting the wound speak for you. You speak with clarity, not as a defense, but as an offering. This isn't easy. It's the most difficult practice of all, staying present with your pain without letting it perform. But with each time you do, your nervous system rewires, your ego softens, your soul expands. You begin to trust yourself, not just in peace but in conflict. You start to understand that you are not your triggers. They don't own you anymore. Your nervous system has learned to differentiate between past wounds and present reality, between the conditioned responses of the shadow and the present moment of your true self. Each time you pause, you give yourself space to choose. It's a quiet act of rebellion against the old reflexes that once dictated your behavior. It's an embodiment of trust in your own capacity to navigate discomfort. You've shifted from reactivity to presence. And with that shift, you reclaim your power. You stop reacting out of habit, out of fear, out of old stories. Instead, you respond with clarity and authenticity. You learn that emotional mastery is not about avoiding pain, but engaging with it in a conscious way. When your response comes from yourself, not your shadow, you realize you are no longer a hostage of your history. You are free to choose. The triggers no longer own you, you own them. You've stepped into a new level of awareness, one where your emotions are no longer in control, but you are. Sign number 4. You are no longer afraid to be seen as you are. There was a time when being fully seen felt like danger. You feared judgment, rejection, exposure. So you hid behind perfection, or intellect, or humor. But now you've stopped running from your realness. You show up with your messy thoughts, your flawed timing, your trembling voice, and you stay. Not because you're fearless, but because you're rooted. You no longer need to be the brightest in the room, the most agreeable, the most composed. You just need to be real. Jung believed that wholeness, not goodness, was the goal of individuation, and real love from self or others can only reach what's truly revealed. You begin to let others see your uncertainty. You admit when you don't know. You allow silence to exist without rushing to fill it. The shadow is no longer editing your existence. It's integrated. You are not a performance. You are a presence. And presence is magnetic. People sense it, not as charisma, but as truth. You are no longer afraid to be misunderstood because you finally understand yourself. When you live in alignment with your essence, even your imperfections become invitations. And this is how the shadow, once your prison, becomes your path to liberation. The fear of exposure no longer controls you because you've reconciled with the parts of you that once seemed too much to reveal. You understand that your vulnerability isn't weakness, it's authenticity. You no longer shrink to fit expectations or bend to the will of the world around you. You simply are. And in being, you draw people towards you who see and honor that realness. There's a quiet strength in being unmasked, a courage that emanates from simply existing as yourself. The more you allow yourself to be seen, the more you realize how much peace lives in the truth of your own presence. You've shifted from fearing rejection to welcoming acceptance, not for what you perform, but for what you genuinely are. This is where liberation lies, not in hiding, not in perfecting, but in being fully and unapologetically you. So, what now? The goal of shadow work is not to be healed once and for all. It is to live from your center even when the edges still ache. It's to welcome your humanness with softness, to walk with your shadow, not behind it. Jung said the self is the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious, light and shadow. And every time you respond instead of react, every time you take back a projection, every time you honor your emotions without shame, you are embodying the self. Don't seek perfection, seek presence. The signs are small, a softer tone, a pause before reply, a moment of awareness where there once was autopilot. These are the soul's milestones, and they matter more than you know. Each moment you choose awareness over default, you reclaim pieces of your power. You integrate the parts that were once dismissed, and in doing so, you live more fully, more consciously. The shadow becomes less of a burden and more of a teacher, guiding you back to your center when the world tries to pull you off course. Embrace the imperfections. They are the fingerprints of your becoming. You don't become whole by escaping your darkness. You become whole by holding it with both hands. There will still be days when the old patterns knock, but now you answer the door with grace. You no longer abandon yourself to be liked. You no longer perform peace to avoid pain. You are here, fully. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And now, you're living that privilege, not in loud triumph, but in quiet alignment. Shadow no longer owns you. It walks beside you, and together you walk toward the light. In the dance between light and dark, you've learned to be both. Not perfect, not flawless, but authentic and whole. This is the path of individuation, the sacred union of opposites. You are not just existing. You are embodying the fullness of who you've always been. You are finally home. This is Echoes of Psyche, where we explore the unseen, the symbolic, and the soul's quiet truths. If this resonated, it wasn't coincidence. It was your unconscious remembering something it always knew.